There were 17 wickets on day one at Lord's. And if you didn't see this game, I think that would make you think that there was the greenest wicket that had ever been green. Or maybe there was some kind of inconsistent bounce, or perhaps someone was dipping the balls in kerosene before shooting them out of bazookas at the batters.
This is the last knot. My dad told me to say this.
Well, this was the pitch. You could see here it is the colour of brown. It's brown. It's not CEO brown, but it was brown. Obviously, this is a little bit more misleading in England as it is compared to other places, partly because the Duke's ball continues to move more than the Kookaburra does, no matter what. And there was definitely some movement off the pitch, but not 17 wickets worth. And there's a lot of talk about pitches, but when it comes to England specifically, when there's a low total, quite often it has a little to do with the pitch and sometimes a lot more to do with the ball swinging around. And the ball also swings for longer in England. So again, that could be the reason for all 17 wickets. Except it was actually very rare for the ball to swing a lot. And even when it didn't have that much to do with many of the wickets. In fact, at various times, the ball sort of stopped doing anything at all. And both teams actually tried to get their balls replaced, which is usually a telltale sign for the ball's not doing a lot. I mean, it did swing and it did seam. But again, not 17 wickets worth. Of course, there is a metric that allows us to see just how much the ball was doing and what kind of damage it should have done. So after play, when I ran into Patrick from Crickviz, I asked him what was the expected wickets. And he said 6. Today's expected wicket total was almost trebled by its actual wicket total. And there were parts to this, like no one dropped any catches. Although there were probably a couple of missed opportunities with Alex Lees, who tried to run himself out at least 2, maybe 3 times. But even so, it was 17 wickets. And so what I tried to do was group them together as best I could. The first tier is really batters who were playing at balls that they didn't need to. And I always have a bit of trouble with this. And it's kind of a twofold issue that I have. One is that modern bowlers come wider of the crease. So a delivery that might look wide to us may not seem that way to the guy facing it. Also, wide balls are kind of how you score most of your runs. They are the balls you are supposed to be hitting. And I think the angle might have played a part on the first point. But on the second, I'm not sure many of the players were actually trying to score. Will Young was poking a mile from his body just because he wanted to get bat on ball by the look of it. He doesn't look like a classical opener. He feels makeshift. This ball was definitely that. And he's never going to feel okay looking at this image. Or at the least, he might want to introduce his bat to his front pad, because at the moment they do appear to be strangers. On his ball, it's possible that Latham was trying to make a run, but this was wide and short. And a hideous shot, considering it was from one of the world's most consistent openers over the last few years. It's also worth noting that this actually was dropped, but it pinged off Johnny Bairstow's chest in a way that made it easier to claim on the second chance. So I suppose that means that it was technically a drop, but even that was still caught. On Devon Conway's, you can see that the frames are a little bit messy here, but you can just kind of see Devon Conway's leg stump if you squint a little bit. He's a long way across and defending a ball that is certainly not coming anywhere near his stumps, even if his technique in doing so was much better than perhaps Young or Latham's. And he was facing Broad, who is not just a special bowler to left-handers, but is also great when coming around the wicket. But I'm not sure Conway is going to be looking at this and thinking it's okay to be playing at this particular ball. And we can also chuck Ollie Pope into this group. His ball was probably missing the stumps on width and height, and he looked completely out of his depth batting at number 3 even before this point. Probably because he'd never batted at number 3 in even first-class cricket before. And this was actually a good day. How often will Pope ever get to bat at number 3 for England and come in with 50 or more runs on the board? Though if he keeps playing at these sorts of balls, how often will he bat at number 3 for England? On the face of it, Kane Williamson's shot looks a little bit more of the same, but I think he was probably close to one of the better dismissals of the day. It was a wobble ball that angled in, close enough to off stump, plus Potts had been bringing the ball back in a lot, so I have no problems at that point with Williamson deciding on playing it. He just nicked it. On wide ones, you could probably also add Johnny Bairstow, but I want to include him in another group, the Backfoot Dragon Society, which kind of sounds like it's from Game of Thrones now I've said it out loud. I'm going to start with the negatives here. He obviously has an incredibly angled bat, and that is very obvious. And he probably should have known that many of the shorter balls had not really got up early in the day. Also, a ball or two before, Bolt had delivered something similar, but it had swung back savagely. And this was basically a similar ball and shot, and he just had a warning. Now, all that said, look at where the ball is. You can play the worst shot of your life on this and still barely ever drag it anywhere back near your stumps, let alone onto your stumps. And if this was unlucky, quite clearly was a little bit unlucky, even if it was a poor shot. I don't know what to make of Daryl Mitchell's play on, which was also a bit like that. He got a back of a length straight ball. He got into the line. The ball came back to him a little bit, took the inside edge, and then a chunk of his hip, and it ended up on the stumps. Perhaps both had something to do with the slightly lower bounce on short balls that we saw all day. But more often than not, neither of these balls is going to end up on the stumps. Way more often than not, in fact. But other short balls took wickets as well, and they were also balls that didn't quite get up. The most notable was probably Matty Potts, the man who took 4 wickets and was so excited by it that he cramped up. He can hold a bat. He's certainly nowhere near an all-rounder, but he's not terrible. But he could see that he dropped under a short ball, and it just didn't get up at him. He couldn't get out of the way of it because it was from a left-hander, and it just sort of hit his glove and bounced up. In the end, it wasn't even that much higher than his waist. Kyle Jamieson actually played a shot to his. He went for a hook, but again, the ball was more at maybe a pull shot length. Because of that, he kind of got it all wrong. So he ended up finding a man on the boundary. And Southey's ball didn't get up either. And because of that, I actually think he lost the ball for a little while and just followed through the hook shot without really looking, hoping that the ball wouldn't hit him. There's also something else I want to talk about with Southey and Jamieson's wickets. When New Zealand came out after lunch, I think they decided that they had to score runs because before lunch they had not decided to score any runs. So they took a few chances, they played a lot of shots, and it probably seemed like a good idea at the time. In retrospect, the pitch was flattening a little bit, the ball was going out of shape, and Colin de Grandhomme was finding some excellent form. They probably should have just batted normally, but that's easy to say now. And to prove that they weren't batting normally, it wasn't just that Jamieson and Southey were attacking, because those are two more attacking players anyway. But my favourite one was when Ajaz Patel tried to smash Jimmy Anderson back over his head and clothed it so badly it basically didn't go anywhere at all. But it does make me wonder that without that intent from that little mini period, if New Zealand would have actually batted a little bit longer today, and at the very least, we would have had 17 wickets. England also lost some wickets with attacking shots as well. One was Stokes, who perhaps also saw his best chance of getting England in front was to play some. That in itself is quite random when you think about where the game was. Half an hour after tea, it looked like New Zealand was going to lose this match. Easily, it looked like it was already about to be a no contest. Yet, very soon after that, by the time Stokes came out to bat, England were already sliding so much, he felt the need to counterpunch. It was incredible how quickly it happened. And so Stokes tried to drive a ball that was swinging massively, which wasn't quite the right length. And all things considered, it was an odd bit of cricket because Stokes managed to outside edge a ball that was massively swinging into him. Zach Crawley also found the outside edge. His was a lot less odd. New Zealand just kept letting him cover drive until, he went out to it. Which at this point, it's so common, it's hardly worth mentioning, although I'll probably make a whole video on it. Oh, and to get back to something slightly more surprising, Joe Root went out to Colin de Grandhomme today. I don't really know how to process that. It wasn't the sort of ball that you would expect. In fact, there are days and pitches when going out to CDG is fine. I'm not really sure that this was particularly one of them. Almost no one in world cricket has been able to get Root out other than Pat Cummins consistently. And CDG's gentle swingers are not so much like Pat Cummins at all. I'd like to do a big analysis on this ball, but I'd also like to forget it ever happened. I will do slightly more on Alex Lees though, because he did something quite special today. He took the entire batting on off stump thing to the max by standing outside off stump and a mile down the wicket. And this is what it looked like. And the plan was obviously to stop edging balls outside off stump because he's outside the line. And because he's outside the line, he can't be out LBW. The problem is that he was still very much, in fact, out LBW because you can only move so much outside the line, right? If the bowler's delivering it, then it's still quite possibly going to hit you in front of the stumps or you're going to miss it and you're going to be bowled. And in his case, he missed it and was out LBW. So when you look at everything we just talked about, we have a couple of players who probably poked at wider ones, but I'm not sure it was an epidemic. There were some wickets from perhaps the ball not quite getting up as much, but even so, it wasn't dangerous. And there were certainly faults within those shots. There was a couple of attacking shots, but you wouldn't say anyone in the top order was massively reckless. And I think you'll notice that in no way is this the kinds of dismissals you assume to see on a 17-wicket day. In fact, we didn't even have that sort of spree of wickets. They just, every couple of overs, a wicket would come. It was almost consistent, like a drum beat in the background. And as Barrett tweeted, there was some bowlers on the scene. And I think the general quality of bowling was quite high. Not just to mention the four that Barrett mentioned, but Kyle Jamieson. Even Potts in his first test bowled really, really well before he had to go off the field. The level of bowling was quite high. Again, it wasn't 17 wickets high. In fact, I'm not sure there's anything that sort of justifies how many wickets we saw today, other than the fact that in modern cricket, when seam bowlers are doing well, wickets fall very fast. You could chalk this up to the wobble ball. There was certainly plenty of wickets that had something to do with that today, or the fact that you think modern batters are rubbish. Whatever takes your fancy. But I don't think there's any justification for the 17 wickets. There was some good bowling, there was some poor batting. There wasn't 17 wickets worth of anything. But if there's one image that sums it all up, I think it's this. Tom Blundell had a whole bunch of balls from Potts that were swinging away. And then he had this one ball go straight, probably because it was a wobble ball. He tried to leave it and then decided to play it. And then he didn't quite finish the shot that he was trying to play. And he ended up like this. Bat above his head, in the middle of nowhere, looking at his broken stumps, wondering how it all went wrong. In some ways, this happened about 17 times.